This next video is going to be about oil pressure testing, and so we're going to test the oil pressure on the Pontiac engine in the classroom. Now, if you notice, or if you remember from a previous video and also the chapter review that we did, oil pressure is essential to determining the health of the engine. We need to make sure that the oil pressure is high enough and that it's in the specification range so that we know that there's no other issues with the engine. We also need to compare the oil pressure with the dash gauge to make sure that they're both agreeing with each other. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out how much oil pressure we should have in the engine. So what I've done is I've looked up the information on ProDemand. And if you look, we've got the oil pressure here, and we should be at about 50 to 80 psi at 1,000 RPMs. And so that's where we should be with the, that's the 2.2 liter. The 3.4 liter engine is this one right here. So with the engine warm, it should be at 15 psi at 1,100 RPMs. So that's what we should have on the engine. And that's another point where you need to make sure that you're looking at the correct specification for the engine, because if we would have gone with our first mistake up here with the 2.2 liter engine, it says 50 to 80 psi, and the 3.4 liter is only 15 psi. So we could have condemned this engine without a cause. So anyway, it's important to make sure you have the right specifications. Okay, what we're going to do is we've got to take the oil pressure sending unit out and replace it with a gauge. Now, the oil pressure sending unit is usually located right next to the oil filter. And so on this Pontiac engine, that's just right above the starter. If you see the oil filter right down here where my hand is, that's where the oil filter is, and then the oil pressure sending unit is right here. And so first thing we're going to do is unplug it. And then the oil pressure sending unit usually takes a special socket. On the starter motor, this is your battery wire, and so you want to disconnect the battery before you get metal tools in here where you have a chance that you might be able to hit that. Otherwise you'll have sparks going everywhere. So disconnect the battery, and then I'll show you the socket once I get the sending unit out. But the socket is a kind of a special socket that goes on there. And okay, once the sending unit's out, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hook up the hose for the pressure gauge. Okay, I've got the correct adapter on the end of the hose now, so I can get the adapter screwed into the engine block, and then we can do our oil pressure test. Okay, I've got the hose hooked up now, and we're ready to start the engine and see what our oil pressure is. Okay, I'm going to start the engine and we'll see what our oil pressure is. So there's our oil pressure. Looks like we're reading right around 40 psi. So we should be good to go. We can raise the RPMs up to about 1,100 RPM, see what it is. So if you notice, we went up to almost 60 psi, so we should be good on oil pressure. I also wanted to show you the oil pressure sending unit socket. If you notice on this oil pressure sending unit, it's not just a regular hex head bolt. And so it does take a special socket, and the socket looks like this on the inside. I don't know whether you can kind of see that in the camera or not, but it fits the outside of the sending unit itself. And so that's a special socket that it takes for a sending unit. There's shallow ones, there's deep ones. that you can use, and that's what it is. So this concludes the oil pressure test on the engine. So